Hey everybody, Alex from AdaptableStrength.com here to talk to you about intensity and what it means for your training. It's a pretty well established fact that the closer you are to failure, the better your muscle growth is going to be. In general, if you want to summarize it, as long as you're between 0 and 3 reps from failure, then you are going to be getting a pretty solid amount of muscle that you could potentially get. Closer you are to failure, though, there is, at the very least, marginal improvements in how much muscle you can grow. The thing to understand, though, is that you have to be honest about where you actually are on that question of how close to failure are you really. So we're going to delve into that here, show you some examples, and talk about the different ways to quantify exactly what that means for your training. All right, so let's get into what real training really is. The first thing to understand when you are talking about your effort inside of training is recognizing different ways that your training can... That's a terrible sentence. Oh my God. Okay. All right. So when we're talking about effort in training, we have to understand the different variables that this encompasses. So there are about 6 solidly looked at ways where you can go ahead and change what kind of effort you're looking at in the gym. The biggest thing to recognize, though, is that some are going to be programming changes. They're not actually going to be immediate within the set techniques that you can utilize. So when we look at the direct effort changes, you basically have your ability to decrease your proximity to failure, basically try and get closer and closer to failure and potentially reaching failure. The other thing you can do is take a look at the intensity technique side of things, where you're actually going to go beyond failure. That's what the intensity technique is for. It's a method to go way beyond than what you would normally be able to do in a singular straight set. So we'll go ahead and talk about how to go quantify that type of effort. And there are 2 general ways that people do this. You're looking at RPE or RIR. I generally prefer RPE because there's a level of nuance that it can have that RIR just cannot. RIR is just simply taking a look at reps in reserve, hence RIR. What that means, though, is that you are strictly within full numbers. You're at 1 RIR, 2 RIR for 1 rep in reserve or 2 reps in reserve, which is fancy ways of saying how many reps are you from failure. If you're 2 RIR, you have 2 reps in reserve, you are 2 reps away from failure. The thing, though, is RPE, in my opinion, allows you to create a little more room for flair in a way, because you get to have halves in there. So yeah, sure, RPE 10 becomes your maximal level of effort, and generally RPE on a scale of like 1 to 10, but in terms of lifting, it only really matters between 6 and 10. 10 is failure. RPE 9, you could do 1 more rep. It is actually the same as 1 RIR. RPE 8 is the same as 2 RIR. You have 2 reps away from failure. But what really gets to be helpful is the halves. At RPE 9.5, you maybe could have done 1 more rep. RPE 8.5, you had 1 more rep, and you maybe could have gotten 2 reps. The way that I like to keep it quantified is that if I'm reaching RPE 10, then I went for another rep, and I could not get it. If I hit RPE 9.5, that means my last rep was a serious struggle, and it might have been an RPE 10. But statistically speaking, if I did not try for that next rep, there is technically a world in which maybe I could have gotten it, in which case I maxed that out at RPE 9.5. Then we have the simple truth that if you're at 4 RIR or you're at RPE 6, it's a warm-up set. Does not count. It is not a real set. That is not enough to give you enough stimulus to really, really, really maximize muscle growth. That is a time where you go and take a look at the weight you just did, and it's like, all right, it's time to either up that weight a bit or add more reps or do something to make sure that your intensity can get up there. So there are some studies that have looked at whether people can actually gauge their RPEs effectively, and the short answer is a lot of people can't. If you want to look at the really, really broken down version of it, once your reps start to involuntarily slow down, all other variables being equal, you have at that point about 3 reps more that you could have done, give or take, depending on the exercise. So if you have someone on the outside and they're watching you and they're like, your first rep and last rep looked identical, and you're there feeling like, oh my God, that was really, really hard, you have to reevaluate. You have to reevaluate and recognize the fact that you're not hitting what you're really capable of. I've worked with a lot of people, and a general rule of thumb with someone is that the newer they are to lifting, the greater the RPE they think they're hitting. And then when I tell them no, they're sometimes a good 2, 3, or 4 RPE below what they think they are, they have this wide-eyed moment. And then what ends up happening is we push them. And a really nice concrete example is that I was working with this experienced lifter. She's probably been lifting about 10 years or so, was trying to be really serious. She's worked herself to doing a bunch of pull-ups, and so like she was strong. And I started working with her on that intensity aspect. And I remember we were doing seated cable rows, and we put her to 80 pounds. She pushed out 9 reps, and the prompt that I gave her was go until you think you can't anymore. And she's like, all right, yeah, I think that was it. Like maybe I could have done one more. And I said, no, that's not true. And I'm going to prove it to you. And she was like, took her a step back. I was like, wait, seriously? And I was like, yes. So what I then did was I had her go up 10 pounds to 90 pounds. And then I just pushed her. And I said, okay, you're just going to follow exactly what I say and keep going. And all I did was just keep encouraging her to do more and giving her cues on her form and everything. And she ended up getting 13 reps at 10 pounds more than the weight that she did before. And afterwards, she was like, okay, that was really eye-opening. And this is something that has happened in many different forms with many different people that I've worked with. And I want to make sure that you watching this are not going to fall into that same trap. So when you are training, all of this is going to lead you into having a progression in terms of your training program. 8 weeks is a good way to do that. And if you look at this progression, it starts off lighter at RPE 7, and then you work to RPE 9 to 10 in that range. But it's over time. And in order to keep increasing the stimulus that you're introducing to yourself through training and trying to get better, you'll notice this is getting very specific week to week. And if you're not able to accurately gauge your RPE, then this is worthless. And you're not going to set yourself up for the success that you should be able to achieve. So you'll see start RPE 7 and in increments of halves to ones all the way up until you get close to failure for those last couple of weeks. Then you repeat. So you want to make sure that, yeah, you're increasing that intensity, but you can't just keep increasing intensity past RPE 10 forever. That's going to lead you into a lot of trouble in terms of your ability to recover. So you then dial it back down again. And you do this slowly increasing cycle of starting with lower RPEs to higher RPEs. But remember, always 7 as the minimum. 6 and below, that's a warm-up. So your easy weeks, RPE 7. Hard weeks, RPE 10. Scale it back to the easy weeks, RPE 7, and then over time build back up to RPE 10. That's going to give you a good reason to expand upon your prior week all the way up and then get a little bit of a deload in there to then go ahead and ramp back up again. That'll manage the fatigue and help you with a really, really solid progression. So let's get into analyzing what the RPE of a set is. And we're going to play a little game. And that game is simply, what RPE is this? I'm going to show a few videos of me training, and it's going to have you see exactly what it looks like for me personally. Now, the thing to recognize before we start the videos is this. Some of them are going to look like they don't quite match what I'm saying about when the weight starts to slow down. At that point, you have 3 reps left. But you have to remember I added on give or take, depending on the exercise. And also depending on the person. Some people are more fast twitch dominant, some people are more slow twitch dominant, and so their speeds of lifting can differ. So these are my approximations using the combination of how I feel as well as my experience on the lifts themselves. And therefore, what I'm going to show you might be a little different from how you present. But I can assure you these are honest estimations of my capabilities. So let's get that going. The first lift we're going to take a look at is a really interesting machine where you're doing essentially a Smith machine, but it's built to do rowing. And you'll notice that throughout this lift and all of the lifts you're going to be seeing is that form is really, really, well, it's attempted to be standardized throughout. So you're watching me struggle a ton, but my back isn't rising and it gets slow. These reps really, really slow down, but they are still within the standardized form that was laid out. So you can see that was hard. And we're going to go ahead and take a look at 9.5 for my RPE. You can make a very strong argument that that was actually RPE 10 because that last rep was really slow and it was painful. I can definitely assure you that. But what we are trying to do is to create statistical viability. And to me, since I did not attempt another rep, I can only max out that RPE at 9.5 and not 10. However, take a look at this. Here we're watching me do some dips, and I even tried to give myself a little bit of rest before the final rep, but then I went for it and it just wasn't happening. That qualifies as your RPE 10. So you'll see this as the sets go on and you're looking at exactly what's happening. You can also have an interesting time looking at how truly mentally dialed in I am throughout these sets. So this one's going to take a whole different approach. This is me doing some squats, and it's a warm-up. I wasn't even that mentally dialed in. They moved quickly. I was honestly a little sloppy about it, but you need to be honest with yourself, and I'm showing you that for me. Like, not all my sets are perfect. I should have concentrated more on that one, but in the end, it's a warm-up. It was fine. So let's continue watching these other videos. Here we have just some solid lat pull downs using a mag grip, a close grip. It's a preferred grip of mine because I really like the way that it makes my lats able to stretch at the top. So if you're trying to go ahead and do these, you'll notice you have a little bit of swing in them, but it's just not enough to give actually any momentum into it. And that was basically the lightest a work set could possibly be for me. Now we've got some lunges. These things are awful. And this is when we start to get into a discussion about how some exercises, there is a very small gap between when the pain starts and your strength ends. But there are other exercises where there is a very large gap between where the pain starts and your strength ends. Lunges are one of those. There are also techniques you can do that are going to make the pain come a lot sooner as well, like pause squats. So here are some heel elevated pause squats. And these are long pauses. I can very much assure you that even after the first rep, I'm very uncomfortable. But it's still showing standardization of form. Even with it being painful and difficult, I'm concentrating a ton. The descent is slow. I'm keeping it under control. And I'm breathing, focusing, bracing, hitting all of the check marks. There are a couple small things that I can see in here that I could definitely improve, but the effort is still enough to have that be a warm-up set. Not a warm-up set, a working set. But look at the honesty. I'm saying it's really painful, but it was still only an RPE 8. Leg press is probably my number one exercise that I use to teach people RPE. Because you are locked in with the machine into a very secure position, you are able to have support from all angles, from your feet to your back, and a seat to sit in. You have the handles to hold on to, and if you can really mentally dial in, you're going to have a whole lot of pain, but that is going to be a very long way from when your strength ends. So you can see here, I'm already in a decent amount of pain. And if you look at the, honestly, the coloration difference between my face and my legs, I'm not having a great time here. But look at the standardization of form that's still taking place. So we are having lots of things happening to look at in terms of effort, but it's always intentional. It's not blind effort. I'm not just heaving and throwing around and looking all crazy with the sheer pain on my face. I'm having pain on my face, but look at the depth. Look at the slow pace that the weight is being lowered. Even though I am getting to be in excruciating pain at this point, and my body's starting to shake really, not too bad yet, but it's It's shaking. Yeah. But I'm still going. And you're looking at this, and from the outside, you're probably wondering, why isn't he stopping? And that's because there's more that I can do despite the pain. And this is where being honest about pain tolerance and intensity really comes in. And so, that's what I am. So even after that and all the pain I was in, I still only give that an 8.5 for my RPE. I think there's a good chance that I could have gotten another 2 reps there. So take that into consideration when you are doing your own lifts and trying to figure out just how much effort you're putting in versus what you are actually capable of in terms of failure for that whole set. If I can be in that much pain and do that many reps, I think it was 14 on that set, and the pain was really starting around reps 4 or 5, you got to be honest with what you're actually capable of versus what you do. And that's why it's 8.5 and not a 9.5. But let's talk now about going beyond failure. And that's where intensity techniques come in. They're really a technique that's going to be fantastic for when you're short on time because they're incredibly, incredibly demanding on your body to execute. They are potentially extremely taxing. You're maybe, if you want to put numbers on it, looking at your normal set being a cost on a scale of 1 to 10, costing 7. But if you are looking at your intensity techniques, then maybe you have to 7 and then add on a couple more. And if it's a one with multiple rounds in it, like it drops with a few rounds or myo rep rounds, you then just add on another 5 or another 3 or whatever. But in the end, you're looking at a greater cost than just doing a standard straight set. And it's magnifying the pain and everything to it. So good and bad. You don't want to overdo them. So the way that I kind of look at it is that even at the very most intense part of your workout program, so towards the end of those 8 weeks, you're looking at maximum 3 to 5 intensity techniques per that session. And most people, I would say 3 is the limit. The 5 is there for those people who are really short on time and are advanced, where they're trying to do a full push workout in 40 minutes and they're basically destroying everything with a single exercise. And since they can't do the volume of 2 or 3 exercises per muscle group, they got to make that one exercise really count. And therefore, intensity techniques. A lot of people I would limit to 1 or 2, depending on a lot of variables. But that's how taxing it can be if you treat them the way that you should. So let's take a look at some examples. There are 2 ones that I think are arguably the best ones. They are probably the 2 most researched ones out of the intensity techniques out there. Length and partials, especially in the last few years, has gotten a lot of research on its advantages, where I'll give you an example of my favorite study on this, which is just simply probably an old one at this point, but it was out of a lab in Japan where they had people do tricep pushdowns with one arm, and their other arm they did overhead tricep extensions. So they had the stretch position for the overhead and the shortened position for the normal tricep pushdown. And there was 50% more growth that happened in the overhead arm. Really simple test, and because it was done with each person being their own control, there are no variables that are not controlled because it's the same person. They're having the same food as themselves. So you're not going to have variations like that. It's all within the same person. It's very, very statistically significant in my eyes. So length and partials are your technique that you can add on that involve that kind of style, where you put more stretch on that, more tension on that stretch and potentially get more growth because of that. So the way to do it is you do your entire set to failure, and then you just continue doing some reps with the end of the range of motion to really try and tax that muscle. And because you don't have the strength to do a full range rep, you still have strength enough to do a partial. And if you do the length in position, even better. So it hits that really nice sweet spot for intensity where you don't have to change your setup at all. You don't have to change the exercise at all. You don't change the weight or anything. You're already in the exact position you need to be in, and it's just a matter of continuing the set until you can't even push those weights a few inches anymore. So that's a really, really nice way to go about it. Another classic one is a drop set, where you do your set and you're going to go to pretty much RPE 9 or 10, and then lower the weight to a certain amount that will cause you to fail probably between 3 and 8 reps or so. And then you go to failure with that, and you can choose to do theoretically as many of these as you want. I would say at maximum, generally 2 or 3 drops are about as far as you want to go. After that, I don't see a ton of point. An example that might be an exception are run the rack dumbbell lateral raises, or maybe curls, things like that, where you basically start at the low end of the rack with the lightweight, go all the way up as far as you can, doing maybe 5 to 10 reps with each weight, and then when you can't go any higher, you then just do the same thing then in reverse. So if you go up to doing 25-pound dumbbells for 8 reps and you fail there, then you pop down to 20s and go to failure, then 15s, etc., etc. All right, so your exercise selection for these techniques, you're looking at generally making sure you have some kind of external support. You don't always need to have external support. Like you can see that I was doing these with these bent over rows, but the floor kind of counts as support to some degree with some exercises. It's a little bit of a stretch because at the same time, I would say don't do these with things like deadlifts. It's support, but also trying to do it with manageable systemic costs. So squats, probably not a great idea, at least freestanding barbell. You could get away with doing these with like hack squats because you have more support than you would normally have with a barbell. And I would say for the drop sets, a really nice way to do it, especially if you're training alone, is with a machine that has a weight stack. So if you start off with 120 or whatever it is, drop down to 90, then go down to 60, that could be a good way to do the drop set. So we have a couple other ones that I would say are my second tier in a way for the intensity techniques. First one being the myo reps. Myo reps are another one that's great with time. There's a whole theory about them where you're basically causing yourself to have those last 3 or 4 effective reps of each set, because what you do is you go to RP maybe 8 or 9, and then you wait 5 to 10 seconds, and then you go again, same exact weight and everything, and go again to RP 8 or 9. And you do that as many times as you want, and then the last round, you just go to failure. So you could theoretically just do 2 rounds and call it good, or you can go up to 4 or 5. That sometimes happens if you do the myo rep match strategy, which is just going to one straight set, and however many reps you get, each successive round after that, you have to hit that same amount of reps. And you just have to then put in myo rep pauses, or you won't be able to reach those same amount of reps. So oftentimes you'll see a decrease of about 3 reps or so per set when you are going really, really high with the intensity. And so by definition then, if you're going for a set of 12 in your first one, then set of 9, then set of 6 on that, you add in the myo rep rounds and you get 12, 12, 12, you're going to have a lot more taxation upon that muscle. So it's a good strategy to add that level of intensity. Experiment with it. You'll have another discussion with yourself about which exercises this is best with. And again, I would say do not do it with something like a freestanding barbell squat. That's asking for trouble. But a hack squat, something with external support, fantastic. Lateral raises, that'll work as well. The last one we'll talk about are negatives. Negatives are simply putting more demand on the muscle because the negative portion of a rep, you're about 30% stronger or so than the positive side. If you want to get fancy, you can say the eccentric and concentric. So your eccentric is going to be about 30% stronger than your concentric. And what that means is once you go to failure with the positive portion or the concentric portion, you can then still do a lot more doing the negative or the eccentric version. So then you just need to have somebody help you with the positive so you can then do the negatives. And again, you can just keep on going with the same exact setup so it's got that same advantage of length and partials. If you're doing it on your own, then you can do it with one-armed exercises. And then one arm helps the positive for the other arm to then allow it to do negatives. Great strategy. I've had success with all 4 of these techniques. and I recommend doing them. But again, all of this still depends upon you being honest with what intensity you're actually reaching and being honest with what your RPE is for each of these. So I thank you for watching and hope that this is helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Yeah, you can go ahead and check out adaptablestrength.com, youtube.com, adaptablestrength, Instagram, all that stuff. If you want to ditch everything and just talk to me directly, feel free to send me an email or a DM on Instagram, and I'll be happy to help out. Thanks.